Something significant just happened in the frozen north, and most people missed it. While the world's attention was fixed elsewhere, Canada's Prime Minister stood on a NATO stage in Norway, flanked by the leaders of Germany and Norway, and quietly rewrote the rules of Arctic security, not with threats, not with bluster, but with $40 billion, a set of carefully chosen words, and a coalition that nobody saw coming. 30,000 troops from 14 nations were already on the ground, training side by side in one of the most strategically important regions on the planet. The exercise was called Cold Response, but what unfolded at the press conference held in its shadow was something far warmer, a realignment of alliances that will shape the Arctic for decades. Norway's officials have said it repeatedly. The United States remains their closest and most vital partner. Yet, a pointed question now hangs in the cold northern air. Can Washington still be fully counted on when it matters most in the high north? A Norwegian journalist asked that question directly in public, with cameras rolling and the whole world watching. And the answer that came back was not what anyone expected. It wasn't a refusal. It wasn't a confrontation. It was something more precise and far more consequential than either of those things. Mark Carney said yes, then immediately explained exactly why Canada is no longer waiting for anyone's permission to defend its own territory. To understand why that moment matters so much, you need to understand what the Arctic has become. This is no longer simply a vast frozen wilderness sitting quietly at the top of the globe. Beneath the melting ice lie critical minerals, massive energy reserves, and shipping routes that could fundamentally reshape global trade. Russia has been aggressively expanding its military footprint across the region for years. China has formally declared itself a near-Arctic state and is pouring money into northern infrastructure and shipping projects. And the United States, under Donald Trump, has been openly discussing the idea of acquiring Greenland, a NATO ally's territory, for its mineral wealth. For countries that actually border the Arctic, that combination of pressures has exposed a deeply uncomfortable truth. The geopolitical ground is shifting. Long-standing assumptions about who defends what and how are no longer reliable. And every nation with territory in the high north is being forced to recalculate. Canada's calculation has produced a striking result: $40 billion in new Arctic investment, a firm commitment to maintaining a year-round presence across a region that accounts for 40% of Canada's entire landmass and 75% of its coastline. New ports, upgraded airstrips, advanced surveillance systems, and expanded communication networks stretching across one of the most remote and demanding environments on Earth. And deliberately deepened partnerships with Norway, Germany, the broader Nordic nations, and the Baltic states, all stitched together through NATO's existing framework. Carney put it plainly at the press conference. Canada is committing to change its defense posture in fundamental ways, maintaining a visible presence 365 days a year, on land, at sea, and in the air, across territory that also shares a 3,000-kilometer border connection with the European Union through Greenland. That last detail is worth letting sink in. The Arctic is not simply a bilateral space between Canada and the United States. It is transatlantic. It connects North America directly to Europe, and Canada, sitting at that junction, is now positioning itself as the critical bridge between the two. When the Norwegian journalist pushed further, asking directly whether Canada and Germany still trust the United States on Arctic security, Carney's answer was a masterpiece of diplomatic precision. He affirmed the NORAD relationship, the integrated air defense system that has functioned for his entire lifetime. He acknowledged the deep and real value of that partnership. And then, without a single hostile word, he pivoted. Canada is now taking on more control, more responsibility, directly, independently, in close partnership with European allies who share the same values and the same strategic interests. Reading between those lines requires no imagination at all. The message was unmistakable. Washington remains a welcome partner, But Canada has stopped assuming Washington will always lead, always show up, and always prioritize the Arctic the way Canada needs it to be prioritized. This is the new Arctic equation taking shape in real time. It is no longer a simple bilateral arrangement between Ottawa and Washington. The picture now includes Canada, Norway, Germany, the Nordic bloc, and the Baltic states, a coalition of democracies collectively committed to defending the High North together. The timing and the setting were not accidental. Choosing to deliver these announcements at a major NATO military exercise with 30,000 troops in the field and allied leaders at his side, Carney ensured that every defense ministry and strategic planning body across the alliance would hear the message loud and clear. This was not a routine press briefing. It was a carefully staged declaration of strategic intent delivered on the largest possible stage. The contrast with the approach coming from Washington is stark and instructive. While one side talks about buying allied territory and questions the value of decades-old partnerships, Canada is writing checks, building infrastructure, and expanding the coalition of nations willing to stand together in the world's most contested frontier. While one posture pushes allies away, the other is pulling them closer, deliberately, methodically, and with genuine long-term purpose. One analyst summarized the underlying anxiety driving all of this with blunt clarity. The recent announcements are fundamentally about asserting sovereignty over the Arctic, because Canada is well aware of Russian and Chinese activity in the region, and frankly, because Canada cannot afford to ignore the possibility of being, as he put it, Greenlanded by a Washington administration that looks at accessible critical minerals and simply wants to scoop them up. That phrase, being Greenlanded, captures something real and raw. If the United States is willing to openly discuss acquiring territory from a fellow NATO ally, the implicit question for Canada becomes unavoidable. What does that mean for Canada's own vast Arctic holdings? What does it mean for Canadian sovereignty over resources that are now becoming economically viable as the ice retreats? Carney's answer is not a speech. It is a policy. $40 billion, year-round presence, European partnerships, sovereign capability. The message is embedded in every single one of those commitments. For decades, Canada quietly allowed its Arctic infrastructure to weaken. The prevailing logic was comfortable and simple. The United States would be there. NORAD would handle it. The frozen North would stay frozen, geopolitically speaking. That logic no longer holds. The ice is melting. The competition is intensifying. And Canada is finally reckoning with the reality that sovereign territory requires sovereign will and the practical capability to back it up. What unfolded in Norway during those days amounts to far more than a press conference. It was a signal sent simultaneously in multiple directions. To European allies, it said Canada is ready to be a genuine Arctic partner, not a junior participant. To Russia and China, it said the High North is watched, defended, and not available for opportunistic expansion. And to Washington, it said the door remains open, but Canada is no longer standing at that door waiting for it to open. This is what confident, forward-looking statecraft looks like when it does not rely on intimidation or theatrics. It builds, it invests, it forges coalitions. It shows up 365 days a year on land, at sea, and in the air, and it does so whether or not anyone else is watching or applauding. The Arctic is the frontier of the 21st century. The nations that invest in it now, that build the relationships and the infrastructure today, will shape what it becomes tomorrow. Canada has just made its position on that question unmistakably clear. The world was watching, and it heard every word.